What's the one truth about avoidance that completely destroys their emotional armor when you finally see it? There's something avoidants desperately hope you'll never figure out. Not their communication style, not their need for space, not even their fear of commitment. Most people spend years trying to decode avoidant behavior, focusing on the surface-level patterns, the hot and cold cycles, the mixed signals, the emotional walls. But these are just symptoms, distractions really. While everyone sees an emotionally detached person who doesn't need anyone, the reality is exactly the opposite. The real secret lies underneath all of that, hidden so well that most avoidants don't even realize they're protecting it. But when you finally see it, really see it, their entire emotional defense system starts to collapse. Because the truth isn't that they don't feel. The truth isn't that they don't care. The truth isn't even that they don't want love. The truth is so much more vulnerable than any of that. To understand what avoidants are really hiding, you need to see past the illusion they've perfected. Picture someone who spent their entire life learning to hold their breath underwater. They've gotten so good at it that everyone, including themselves, believes they don't actually need air. That's what avoidants have done with emotional need. They've mastered the art of appearing self-sufficient, not just independent, actually immune to the messy, complicated world of human emotional needs. They've convinced themselves and everyone around them that they operate on a different level entirely. At first glance, you see someone who's simply more independent than most people. Look closer, and you notice they seem almost proud of not needing emotional connection. But dig deeper, and you start to see the truth. This isn't natural independence. It's a carefully constructed fortress. This isn't accidental. From early on, something taught them that needing people was dangerous. Maybe it was inconsistent caregiving. Maybe it was emotional overwhelm they couldn't handle as children. Maybe it was simply being born more sensitive in a world that didn't know how to handle sensitivity. So they adapted. They learned to survive by creating an internal myth that they were different from other people, stronger, more evolved, less needy. This myth became their identity, their superpower, their way of moving through the world without ever having to risk the vulnerability that comes with genuine human need. But here's what they don't want you to know. Maintaining this illusion requires enormous amounts of energy. It's exhausting to constantly monitor your emotional expressions, to carefully calibrate how much you care, to always be ready to withdraw the moment things feel too real. They've become emotional athletes, constantly performing strength they don't actually feel. And the performance is so convincing that most people, even those who love them, buy into it completely. Which is exactly what they need you to do. Because if you don't believe in their emotional invulnerability, their entire sense of safety crumbles. The persona they've created isn't just a preference or a personality trait, it's a survival mechanism. And like all survival mechanisms, it only works as long as the threat it's designed to protect against doesn't get too close. But what exactly are they protecting? What's the truth they're so afraid you'll discover? Here it is. The thing they hope you'll never see. You're absolutely right to sense that something doesn't add up about their emotional detachment. Yes, they do seem genuinely unaffected by things that would devastate most people. But the reason isn't what you think. Avoidants feel everything more intensely than almost anyone else. Not less, more. They're not emotionally unavailable because they don't have emotions. They're emotionally unavailable because their emotions are so overwhelming that their entire personality has organized itself around not feeling them fully. Every wall they've built, every defense they've perfected, every way they've learned to keep people at arm's length. It's all designed to protect them from the intensity of their own emotional world. Think about it. You don't develop elaborate defense systems against something that doesn't affect you. You don't spend your life avoiding something that isn't actually threatening. You don't become an expert at emotional distance unless emotional closeness feels genuinely dangerous. The avoidant's greatest fear isn't that they're unlovable. It's that they're too much, too intense, too overwhelming, too needy once you get past their defenses. So they've learned to love in small doses, to care in measured amounts, to need people just enough to function, but never enough to lose control. But the feelings are there. All of them. The longing, the attachment, the deep hunger for connection. They haven't eliminated these things. They've just gotten incredibly skilled at managing them. This is why they can seem so contradictory. Passionate but distant. Caring but cold. Present but unavailable. They're not playing games or being manipulative. They're constantly trying to balance two impossible things, feeling everything while appearing to feel nothing. When you understand this, really understand it, something shifts in how you see their behavior. The walls aren't there because they don't care. The walls are there because they care so much it scares them, and that's when everything changes. The moment an avoidant realizes you figured out their secret, their behavior changes dramatically. Not gradually, not subtly, dramatically. You can actually feel the shift in the air around them when this happens. It's like watching someone who thought they were invisible suddenly realize everyone can see them. The panic is immediate, and you can almost taste their desperation. First comes the denial. They'll try to convince you that you're wrong, that you're reading too much into things, that you're projecting or being overly emotional. This isn't gaslighting exactly, it's desperate self-preservation. If they can convince you that you haven't really seen what you've seen, they can go back to feeling safe. But if the denial doesn't work, if you hold steady in your understanding, something more interesting happens. They start overcompensating. Suddenly they're extra distant, extra independent, extra focused on proving that your insight was wrong. They'll go out of their way to demonstrate how little they need anyone, how perfectly fine they are alone, how unaffected they are by emotional connection. This overcompensation is the most telling response of all. Because people who genuinely don't care don't need to prove they don't care. People who are actually emotionally detached don't work so hard to appear emotionally detached. The trying too hard phase is where you see the cracks most clearly. Their usual effortless cool becomes forced. Their natural independence becomes performed. Their emotional distance becomes obviously deliberate rather than genuinely felt. Some avoidants will disappear entirely during this phase. Not because they don't care, but because being around you feels too exposing. You've become a mirror reflecting back their own emotional intensity, and they can't handle what they see. Others will become hyperanalytical. They'll start dissecting your behavior, your motivations, your emotional patterns. This is their attempt to regain control by turning the focus back onto you. If they can make you the one being examined, they don't have to sit with the discomfort of being truly seen. But the most vulnerable response is when they start testing you. Small confessions, tiny admissions of need or uncertainty. They're trying to see if your understanding of their intensity will translate into rejection or judgment. Because in their experience, being fully seen usually leads to being too much for people to handle. So why is this revelation so devastating for them? Understanding why requires understanding what an avoidant's sense of safety actually depends on. While most people find safety in being loved despite their flaws and needs, avoidants have built their entire world on the opposite foundation. Safety comes from never revealing flaws and needs in the first place. Their entire emotional architecture is built on the premise that they can control how much people see of their internal world. They've organized their whole life around being the one who cares less, needs less, feels less. When you see through this carefully maintained illusion, you're not just challenging their behavior, you're challenging their entire sense of identity. It's similar to telling someone who's built their whole life around being the smart one that intelligence isn't actually their defining trait. Or telling someone who's organized their identity around being strong that their strength is really just well-managed vulnerability. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming because it forces them to confront the gap between who they think they are and who they actually are. For years, they've told themselves they're different from other people, more independent, less needy, better at handling life without emotional messiness. This story has allowed them to feel special, superior, safe. Your understanding threatens all of that. It suggests that they're not actually that different from everyone else, that their independence might be an elaborate coping mechanism rather than a genuine personality trait, that their emotional detachment might be fear rather than strength. This is why they can't just ignore your insight or brush it off. It hits too close to something they've spent their entire life hiding from themselves. The truth about their intensity isn't just embarrassing or inconvenient, it's existentially threatening. Because if they're not actually the emotionally superior beings they've convinced themselves they are, then what are they? Just people. Complicated, needy, vulnerable people who've gotten very good at pretending otherwise. For someone whose entire sense of safety depends on being above human emotional messiness, this realization is earth-shattering. But how can you tell when you've actually hit this target? When an avoidant realizes you've seen through their emotional armor, their response follows predictable patterns. These aren't conscious strategies. They're automatic protective reflexes. Initially, you might notice small changes in how they text you. Maybe they respond faster or slower than usual. Then you start seeing them ask more direct questions about your feelings toward them. Finally, you realize they're actually monitoring your every reaction, desperate to gauge whether you're judging them for what you've discovered. You'll notice them monitoring your reactions more carefully than usual. They become hypervigilant about signs that you might be judging them or finding them too intense. A look, a pause in conversation, a change in your tone. Things they would normally miss or ignore suddenly carry enormous weight. Some avoidants become unexpectedly generous during this phase. Not emotionally generous, practically generous. Offering help, buying gifts, doing favors. This is their way of creating value in the relationship without having to be emotionally vulnerable. If they can't control how much you see of their feelings, they can at least try to control how much you appreciate them. Others go the opposite direction and become withholding, not just emotionally, but practically too. They stop doing the small things they used to do, stop being as available, stop putting energy into shared experiences. This is their attempt to prove to themselves that they don't actually care as much as your insight suggests they do. The most telling sign is how they talk about emotions in general. Someone who previously dismissed feelings as unimportant might start intellectualizing them extensively. They'll analyze emotional patterns, discuss attachment theory, or explain psychological concepts. This allows them to engage with emotional topics while maintaining their sense of being above them rather than subject to them. Watch how they respond to your own emotional expressions too. They might become either hyper-responsive or completely unresponsive. Hyper-responsive because they're trying to prove they can handle emotions appropriately. Unresponsive because they're overwhelmed by the intensity of what your emotions trigger in them. Both responses reveal the same thing. Your emotional expressions are having a much bigger impact on them than they're comfortable with. Now, once you see this truth about avoidance, that their detachment is really managed intensity, you hold something powerful and dangerous. You're not wrong to feel like this knowledge gives you an advantage in understanding them. Yes, it absolutely does change everything about how you interpret their behavior. But with this understanding comes a responsibility that most people don't consider. But it can also be weaponized, used to push them into vulnerability they're not ready for, used to expose them in ways that feel cruel rather than loving. The most important thing to understand is that seeing their truth doesn't give you the right to force them to acknowledge it. Just because you understand that their walls are protection doesn't mean you should try to tear those walls down. Real emotional safety, the kind that allows avoidants to gradually lower their defenses, comes from knowing that their intensity will be met with steady presence rather than overwhelming reciprocity. They need to know that seeing their emotional depth won't turn you into someone who requires them to be deep all the time. That understanding their capacity for feeling won't create pressure for them to feel everything fully in every moment. The paradox of loving an avoidant is that they can only risk showing you their emotional intensity when they trust that you won't require them to live there constantly. This means your response to their truth is everything. Handle it with care, and you might find them gradually becoming more emotionally available than you ever thought possible. Handle it carelessly, and you'll likely find them disappearing entirely, more convinced than ever that their feelings are too much for anyone to handle. Which brings us to a crucial decision point. Understanding this truth about avoidance creates a choice in any relationship with them. You can almost hear the internal alarm bells going off in their head when they realize you see their intensity. You can sense their desperate need to rebuild the walls you've just seen through. And you can feel the weight of deciding what to do with this knowledge. You can use it to develop realistic expectations about what they can offer emotionally and when. This allows you to love them as they are, rather than as you wish they could be. Or you can use it to decide whether their way of loving, intense but carefully managed, deep but protected, is compatible with what you need in a relationship. All of these choices are valid, but all of them require you to be honest about what you're actually dealing with when you love an avoidant. You're not dealing with someone who doesn't feel. You're dealing with someone who feels so much they've had to become an expert at not feeling. That changes everything. Have you ever experienced an avoidant crumbling when they realized you saw through their emotional defenses? Drop a comment about what that looked like in your situation. If this helped you understand the intensity hiding behind avoidant behavior, like this video and subscribe for more insights about the psychology of attachment patterns. Thanks for watching.